She was offloaded at the southern sugar town of Nambour, where her crew set about the ritual of raising steam, the old routine. But what lay ahead no sugar train had ever faced before, a 2,000-kilometre haul way up the coast to where the sugar rails end, in a 50-year-old loco. So they oiled her and provisioned her, and christened her Bundy, after the sugar town where she was built. The final polish, and they climbed aboard and said, "Bundy, let's go." Small gauge steam locomotives were the backbone of the Australian sugar industry from the 1880s to their replacement by diesels in the 1970s. Many were scrapped or just left to rust, but not Bundy. Rail devotees salvaged and restored a few of these little tank engines, giving them weekend runs on closed tracks. But this was something else. This was a 50-year-old engine on a 100-year-old railway. The long ribbon of fertile land that runs up Queensland's Pacific coast grew up on sugar. In the glory days of steam, roads were bad or non-existent. River and rail were the kings of heavy transport. It's a rollicking ride on the old narrow gauge line. The rails are only an arm's length apart, but they carry remarkable loads. Modern sugar diesels may be bigger and stronger than Bundy, but they're just the evolution of an idea that started when the sugar pioneers laid the first temporary rails across their paddocks. Amid the dirt and dust of the cane fields, where men hefted the whole-stick cane and sweated in the high tropical heat, horses hauled the harvest on a makeshift line to the railhead. The arrival of a loco like Bundy to whisk the cane away to the mill was like the coming of a miracle. The Milliquin Mill still stands on the Burnett River to salute Bundy as she comes steaming back into the lives of the locals who once drove the sugar trains. And they well remember Bundy and her sisters on their good days and their bad.
It's been 22 years. It's brought back a lot of memories. You know, when you had to work these things for real, yeah, at the start of the week they were good, but by the end of the week when you had dirty water and they were priming, they were a real curse to sort of walk onto.
Bundaberg has given its nickname to Bundy and, more famously, to the liquid gold fermented and distilled from sugar. You're looking at $500 million worth of Bundaberg rum. It's long been a precious cargo exported around the world, and so popular locally it was once used in place of money. Back then, a fair bit of unauthorised quality control took place down at the docks. All you needed for this rewarding hobby was a good thirst, a good mate with a good lamp, and a good brace and bit. And, you know, it was such important work. These volunteers did it for nothing.
It's leaking. I think we should get that fixed. What do you think? That's where it's coming from, between the smoke box and the saddle. Yeah. Must be that main steam pipe that's leaking.
At least Bundy's picked a good place to take a sickie, right outside the factory that made her.
Good that it can come home to where it was built, and at least we have got a drawing. And there are not too many drawings of steam locos still remain, because we'll have to cut the pipe and undo these bolts down in here. They probably haven't been undone since 1949, 52, around that time.
Her health restored, the old-timer heads north again, out through suburbs that were bush and open fields when she first rolled out of the factory. Mackay, where the Pioneer River ends its long seaward journey through some of the finest sugar country in the world, and where Bundy meets an old-timer like herself, intent on keeping history alive.
We picked it up in '52. We roared to go down to the place, the railway station, and there it was, sitting in a railway truck. And we brought it up to the mill, and they had great trouble getting it out. It was too heavy for the cranes, you know, 22 tonne. And I eventually got on the line, and I have a chap by the name of Johnny Harbison. He was an old driver at Plaistow, and they put him on the loco as driver, and I went as his fireman. I honestly think it's probably better than when it was new. It just looks better somehow. Yes, there was two of these, two Fowlers, an older one, number 8. And this one, well, it had more steam head because it was new. We used to pull the river, you know, and it pulled 22 4-tonne trucks up the river, this steep grade, and we'd bring them across 22 at a time. Oh, up and down the river. And it used to get hot, you know. It was working hard all the time. Oh, wonderful. Yes, it sort of brings back memories. And going over the hills and through the lantana and rocking along. Beautiful smell of the smoke and coming through the cab and steam and hot oil. Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah. Well, it's just a strange thing how you remember, isn't it? Over all them years. And what, we go back? We go back, yeah. I left here and went to Mossman and I worked on a diesel. And well, they're a lot rougher and with gears and things like that. It was easy to put trucks off the line where these are very flexible, you know. You want to slow them, you just reverse them in a notch. Coupling up was much easier. Oh yeah, always look back on the steam, yeah. Yeah, every time I smell burning coal, I just think of the days on that. How about that?
That's all right.
Bloody good.
No worries.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Oh, wonderful.
Not too many of us old steamers left.
Nah.
Harvesting sugarcane has become a highly mechanised business. As she passes through, Bundy may seem no more than a bit of huffing, puffing nostalgia, a whistle blast from the past. But for older Australians, she brings memories of a shameful time, when the story of sugar turned bitter and as dark as molasses. They called it blackbirding, hunting down South Sea Islanders, deceiving them with labour contracts they couldn't read, then bundling them off to the pitiless Queensland cane fields. Some 12,000 dismissively labelled Kanakas slaved among the sugarcane from the 1870s to the early 1900s. And when there was no further use for them, all but 1,000 were sent back, leaving a broken and stigmatised community.
My grandmother, who came from Ombai, she didn't like that word Kanaka. To her it was offensive.
It was all offensive. Bad food and shelter, new diseases they couldn't endure, and crippling work. In some years, killed 1 in 7.
My grandmother came here in 1875. She was taken from the island home without any warning. She was the type of person who rose above the difficulties that she faced and saw a future vision for her family.
When you've really got to have it, water is where you find it. Surely they won't mind. Nah, just a few hundred litres. Pool probably needed emptying and cleaning anyway. Yeah. And after all, everyone loves a little steam engine like Bundy. A measly bit of water? I mean, you'd hardly call the police.
Fire a sample of your breath, which you can provide by placing your mouth over the mouthpiece here. Blow one continuous breath until I ask you to stop. Understand that? Yep. Commence blowing. Going. Stop. You're clear. 0, 0, 0. This is what you should be.
It might just be time to get out of town. There's a bit of cloud around too, a reminder that Bundy's got to press on, a reminder that the summer storms, the big wet, will soon bring rain and floods sweeping over the cane country. The big sugar holdings of the 1880s were gradually broken up and subdivided into small family farms. The sugar railway became their lifeline, carrying not just cane but mail, freight and supplies from town. Feats of rail engineering remain as monuments to the heroic status accorded the little trains for conquering in so many ways the isolation of the sugar pioneers. And that same sense of isolation still creeps over the Queensland bush come nightfall. It's lonely out here until the flames push back the darkness and the sausages start to sizzle on the fireman's shovel. These old bush comforts attract a couple of ghosts from Bundy's past into the glow of the campfire.
We noticed your Bundy train coming along the track today.
Well, Graham was telling a story about a loco coming down that, so he come down doing about 110 kilometres.
Good fun.
Over the years, someone bailed off in the rails, but mostly we've been told to stay with them. The safest place is on the loco.
But if something went wrong, it was much safer to stop inside rather than get out because you had all the train coming behind you. If you jumped that side and the trucks went that side, there's a big chance you'd get killed. We had one lad killed when the engine jumped the track and the tender came off and rolled over on top of him when he jumped out.
Sugar can be a dangerous business, for wherever there's sugar cane, sooner or later there's fire.
Despite much effort being put into the spark arresters that was put onto the engines, we always managed to keep burning paddocks of cane, throwing sparks out of particularly on heavy pulls if you're pulling a big load of cane and throw a lot of, pulls the coal through, throws it out of the stack and set the place alight.
Well, a loco going past was an excuse to get more cane cut. They usually wait till sugar was prime time and the gang was somewhere else, and here's a chance to get a block of cane cut early and at my time, at the right time, and they'd sneak around the creek bank, and when the old loco went through, boom, up she'd go. Then the phones would ring and we'd redirect grips, cutters from other areas, and they'd come in and cut that block.
I don't think the steam engines were responsible for all the fires that occurred, but
they'd blame the loco, yes. A lot of times it was the loco too, but it'd have to be about a 50-50%, I think.
Cane farmers can no longer blame the locos for starting those very convenient fires. Burning the cane just before it's cut eradicates rats and poisonous snakes before the cane cutters move in. Most of the world's cane is still cut by hand, but in countries like Australia, where machines now do the harvesting, the traditional burn-off is becoming far less common. It had to happen. Sooner or later, Bundy was going to meet up with some cane wagons that needed hauling. To be honest, she wasn't too pleased.
Watercrook.
But in sugar country, it's never long before the cavalry comes to the rescue.
We've used nearly 400 gallons of water from Duke to here. It's gone up to the top.
What do you think's wrong with the water?
Well, it's priming with them.
There's something in the water was making a bloody engine prime. So I've never seen as bad as this.
Trouble is, there's a stiff gradient just ahead.
Well, it puts your fire out, and then you could damage your crown plate. It won't blow up. That's for sure.
See if we can fill it back up again and head off and see if we can get up and over. Give it another go.
Will it make it?
Don't know, I'll tell you when we get there.
At last, steam's up. We're coming through. Clear the rails. The fun stops right here and the work begins. Hard work. And I'm sure I can, I'm sure I can, I know I can, I know I can. Well, I hope I can. I think I can, but I'm not too sure, not sure at all. In fact, I think I rather fear, I hate to admit, but I'm starting to feel that maybe, just maybe, I can't. It's a bit like life. You try your best, you do your darndest with 50 horsepower, and all you get is a kick in the pants from 700 horsepower. North of Mackay, the face of the country begins to change. From here on, Bundy will be steaming through days of high heat and high humidity, through a landscape defined by storms and floods. This is the southern gateway to a place of lushness and colour, one of the world's great showcases of natural beauty and variety. The gateway to the wet tropics. Settlement and sugar cropping have stripped the land of natural vegetation. About all that's left clings to the ocean shore, where the line threads its way through the mangroves. strange, salty forests. They too were once considered a nuisance, something that blocked a nice view of the sea, something to be cleared away. But the mangroves are a nursery, home and shelter for a wealth of aquatic life, much of it prized seafood, creatures that scuttle and swim around the salty shallows and every now and again make a bad career move.
Get over here, rotten side. Forward.
We're now a long, long way from Australia's southern capitals. The pioneering years were tough up here. Distance and isolation bred North Queenslanders who were self-reliant, self-sufficient and scornful of those down south who had it easier. In some ways they still are. Nowadays the North's got every convenience on tap, but there's still a lingering rivalry between folks in the North and folks in the South. A century ago, that rivalry was at boiling point. The locals reckoned their burgeoning wealth, built on sugar, was unfairly taxed, to the great advantage of the South. Some of the northern settlers clung to a united Queensland, but many others, especially in the sugar industry, demanded a brand new breakaway colony. Self-rule for the North.
Which way do you think we're going?
Oh, I honestly don't know. Could be...
Which path to take?
Might be off to the side there. I still think we're going to go straight ahead. Get the map and have a look. Yeah.
The debate almost tore Queensland in two, but was suddenly overtaken by the greater question of nationhood. The Australian colonies were on the verge of federation. The great agreement of 1901 that would forge the old British colonies into a new country, the new Australia. The North soon saw the advantages that lay down this track. Free trade, ready markets for sugar. Federation won the day. Separation was off the agenda, and there were new faces in the cane fields. Enter the Italians.
Welcome, fellas. Come on, come on.
One of the rare areas where so many cultures have blended together. Well, they've had to, and that's the biggest thing about Ingham. The Italian is the strongest because there's so many of us here.
Le donne venivano raggiate perché lui faceva tanto fumo, you know? Allora andavano fuori, facevano,
I came out to Australia with my mother in 1955. My father was already here cutting cane. I learned to speak English at school, but at home I always spoke Italian. And so therefore I can speak English fluently, ma posso anche parlare italiano perfettamente perché è così mi posso parlare in italiano and I can also speak English fluently.
Next bloody thing, the fella come up and she hit this bloody Hudswell Clark, eh? The locos went up like that. We stand up on the cutting watching them, eh? We took off, bugger.
I jumped out, I said, I think we'll kill it, but nothing happened. So
That's the good one I can remember. It was a good one. I never forget the one there.
They didn't expect the Italians to actually become part of the community and mostly importantly, part of the business community. And they started buying up farms and eventually the cane industry in North Queensland was mainly all Italians.
The land is rich and fertile where the sugar grows, but it's infinitely more rare and precious where the sugar stops. Cane fields and bananas, intensely cropped in the far north, have relentlessly destroyed entire valleys of wild lowland rainforest. Precious little has survived. The remnants crisscrossed by streams and too wet to farm. Thankfully, the rail lines running through these fragile places are little used these days. Rainforest is resilient, and a canopy of branches will someday grow back over the gash cut by the rails. But if Bundy was the last train ever to pass through here, the trees wouldn't mind a bit. To exploit every last fragment of arable land, the cane rows are run hard against the narrow belts of trees protecting coastline and riverbanks. And the old forest fights to hold the line against the exotic invader. The prospects for the rainforest are brightest where national parks have been declared. The line still runs along the river, but only because it was here first and the park came later. The twin sentinels of Belland and Kerr and Bartle Frere signal to Bundy's crew that the end of the sugar rail is now not too far distant. Innisfail is a historic name on the roll call of Queensland's prosperous sugar towns. Summer's coming and already the living is easy. But 120 years ago, the town was in wild pursuit of fortune. 18,000 Chinese across the north were gripped by gold fever, that mad, scrambling riot where miners raced from one rainbow to the next and always got there too late. One who failed on the goldfields was Tom C. Poy, but with his wife Chan Han, he opened a general store in Innisfail in 1882. Their children were raised respectful of their ancestry, but in no doubt where their future allegiance must lie. And their father became a local legend.
In the old days, farmers were all struggling. Everybody was struggling for livelihood. And people still tell me the stories about how my grandfather, if it weren't for him, they'd have starved to death. He used to extend credit which went into years and years sometimes. Herbert was my father, and he was a young man who was served in all parts of the business, including the delivery of the groceries. Now, what they couldn't carry on the horse, they agreed to deliver, which consisted of heavy things like bags of potatoes, bags of corn for the chooks, bags of wheat, and bags of chaff for the horses, and big, heavy stuff. And if it was uphill or a bit too hard to push, they had to use a hoe handle jammed in behind the sleepers and lever the thing along. Things weren't easy in those days.
But Bundy has rather more sophisticated tastes that take her a little further north. Port Douglas is the ultimate resort town with everything but everything. Even a parking valet who doesn't know when to shut his eyes and pretend this isn't happening.
Welcome to the Radisson route. I'm Xavier. There you go, mate. Park it for us. Be great. Thank you.
Mossman, the last touch of civilization before Bundy makes her dash to the finish. And a dash it must be. The skies are lowering over the sugar country. The air is so wet you can feel it on your hand. It's almost cloudburst time, when the rivers will break their banks and turn the cane fields of Queensland into broad, muddy lakes. The last bridge, the last cutting, the last curve. And finally, 2,000 kilometres north of that mill yard back at Nambour, where she was first fired up for this odyssey, Bundy steams down the very last straight. And suddenly, in the middle of nowhere, the sugar rail stops and Bundy's dream ends in a steamy sigh of quiet satisfaction. And the cane fields of her younger days, the sweat and hardship, all that wealth, all that history, the immigrants, the towns they built and the lives they led, are left behind. North of here lies the daintree, unspoiled by the plough or the settler's cottage, the eternal rainforest of far north Queensland, a last landscape of pure wilderness.
big one.
Finally, made it to the end.
Yeah.